I, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, do solemnly swear
I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States
and will, to the best of my ability,
preserve, protect, and defend
the Constitution of the United States.
So help me God.
Welcome back, everyone. It's the President's Guy, and as promised, last time we did Mr. Beat's 10 worst American presidents, and today we're going to be taking a look at who he considers to be the 10 greatest American presidents. And as with the worst presidents, there are at least one big notable exception, and I also find his order to be a bit odd. You guys can see in the background, I've kind of got my, there's actually 8 of them, you can only see 4 of them. I'm going to show all of them one day, but I've got my favorite presidents on the wall. I've got Washington, Lincoln, Grant, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, and LBJ. And I'll explain in the future why I've got them each on the wall and what the rest of these documents are. So this gives you a general idea of where I view the president. So you'll kind of see as this goes on why I do or do not agree with his list. And we'll kind of talk about it on the journey through this. So let's see who Mr. Beat considers to be the greatest American presidents.
Hi, I'm Mr. Beat, and President's Day is coming up. One of my favorite holidays. We have a big sale every year. The inventory has to go. Our best and newest models are coming in.
40 and many years ago.
40 a deal with you.
Oh, yeah. Massive deal.
Who's your founding father?
Get a rear view camera.
I see you, baby.
Bluetooth. Talking about the red, white, and blue.
Tooth.
No, we're not talking about
Whoever approved that commercial should be fired out of a cannon into the sun.
a car sale. We're talking about an actual holiday that celebrates the presidents of the United States of America. Not the band, although that's a really good band, one of my favorite bands. The actual presidents of the United States of America. And you...
Interestingly, Rushmore is pretty good in picking good presidents, even though Roosevelt being on there was definitely a favoritism thing. He certainly deserves to be up there.
We have wanted this video for a very long time. Here are my
top 10 presidents of all time.
Number 10, James Garfield, one of our smartest presidents in history. I mean,
This one's got to be based off potential, because it's definitely not off of what happened.
by many accounts, he was very intelligent. He was a self-made man. Started from the bottom, now we're here, okay? Lost his father when he was young, worked to pay for an education, eventually became a businessman and a professor, and then, of course, later a politician, a representative, also a successful military leader for the Union in the Civil War. As president, he appointed many African Americans to posts in his administration, which was unheard of at the time. Now, he didn't last long in office as president. You may already know that he was assassinated shortly after getting into office, but he would have been amazing, and so what he would have been is why I rank him high. He made a name for himself fighting cronyism, fighting the political machines in Washington, D.C., and just fighting corruption in general.
I would generally agree with that. Garfield actually could write in 2 different languages in separate hands at the same time. He could write in Greek and Latin simultaneously. Of course, most people can't write in different languages at one time, so that's impressive. Self-made for sure, but he was also, and Sean Munger does a great video about Garfield, and he talks about how Garfield kind of, especially even when he got the presidential nomination, how he didn't lobby for it, he didn't want it. He thought that he was qualified and it should be given to him, and that should be the end of it, which definitely egotistical, and I suppose he was right because he got it, but it was sort of the same deal when he was a teacher in a Bible college, and when he was a representative, a very successful Civil War general, as were pretty much all of the Grant up until McKinley were all in the Civil War. I could see where Mr. Beat's going in terms of his potential. Again, a very intelligent president, but I don't think he was there long enough for us to judge. And certainly he did appoint African Americans to posts, but that's nothing that Grant didn't also do. So I hope Grant is on this list as well.
Number 9, James Madison. James Madison, the father of the Constitution, of course. Many of the best ideas of the Constitution that we take for granted came from him, and he...
I would suggest that they came from a lot of people. Alexander Hamilton, very intricate in getting the Constitution through. Him and Madison both contributing to the Federalist Papers. Hamilton doing probably 2/3 of them. Madison doing the majority of the rest. John Jay did a few, but basically that was written to get New York to ratify the Constitution after the Constitutional Convention. So I would say, yeah, Madison definitely very involved in it. Did not think we needed the Bill of Rights, but I think Hamilton does not get enough credit in terms of the Constitution's creation and its ratification. Ron Chernow has a fantastic book on Hamilton, which I'm reading now, and I would recommend it to anyone who wants to learn more about that period in time, but also just about a very underrated founding father.
pretty much wrote the Constitution, okay?
Madison, I'm sorry to immediately jump back in, but Madison was also, in many ways, like Woodrow Wilson in the sense that when he arrived at a conclusion, if you were on the opposite side of him, he just assumed you had bad intentions because, again, he was a very educated man who went to Princeton, very smart man, like most of the founders, but he thought that, well, I am educated, I'm smart, I'm a wise, well-read man. If I've arrived at this on this conclusion, it must be the right one, which most people would do, but he didn't leave a whole lot of room for argument if you disagreed with him.
Okay, the Bill of Rights, most importantly, came from James Madison. So just on that alone, that's why
he didn't think that there needed to be a Bill of Rights. He actually thought that spelling out the rights diminished it.
He's one of my favorites. Now, as president, he also was a great leader in terms of once that War of 1812 broke out, he did an amazing job.
Which was not his fault. The War of 1812 kind of comes about because of the Embargo Act of 1807 that Jefferson signs. So you can't put the fault on Madison.
Leading the charge to defend against the British invading the homeland. Now, he was a bit foolish when
the last president
he called
to
for
field.
war against the British, but I digress. He was a key author of the Federalist Papers. And again, when he was my age, he was one of the leading voices at the Constitutional Convention. Number 8, John...
I don't think I'd put Madison in my top 10, but I think he is probably underrated as a president. Definitely in the top half.
John F. Kennedy. I have a lot of respect for his World War II service. I mean, he saved a man's life, for crying out loud. His leadership during the Cuban Missile Crisis was amazing. I mean, let's ignore the Bay of Pigs fiasco. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, he did well. He had learned from past mistakes. He had found a way to ease relations with the Soviet Union at the height of the Cold War. He created the Peace Corps, the Equal Pay Act, which I don't think gets enough attention. And even though it was controversial, he moved civil rights legislation forward. He just gave really good, inspiring speeches. I mean, I still get fired up watching his moon speech at Rice Stadium. We shall go to the moon. I mean, yeah, I'm fired up. Now,
I think Mr. Beat, I think he's come a long way because this video is a few years old. He is very much one to give credit in areas that apply to other people and not give credit to other people in that category. I know for a fact that George H.W. Bush is probably not going to be in this list. Him, along with about a half dozen other presidents, served in World War II. So if that's a bar for measuring your view of a president, which shouldn't be really, because when you judge a presidency, it should just be the presidency. You could make the argument that, you know, outside behaviors and things before and after the presidency affect their historical analysis. But I think if you're going to look at their 4 or 8 years or however much time they were in the office, you have to look at the acts. Yes, the Bay of Pigs was bad. Yes, the Cuban Missile Crisis, he averted that tragedy. Controversial opinion, I'm not all that stoked on Kennedy. LBJ did a lot of the things that Kennedy talked about, but probably wouldn't have done, or even if he tried, wouldn't have been successful. As morbid as it sounds, a lot of the civil rights and voting rights legislation we got in the 60s was in the wake of Kennedy's death, and it was a lot of it was put forward as, you know, honoring Kennedy. When LBJ gives his first speech before the joint session of Congress, and you can see this in the movie All the Way with Bryan Cranston, you see him basically saying, let's pass President Kennedy's civil rights bill. And that's the way he lays it out. And it's kind of hard for people to vote against it that way. And it's an incredibly successful tactic. So Kennedy's not in my top 10, maybe top 15 or 20, but better than bad. And yes, the Rice University speech is fantastic.
Number 7, Harry Truman.
Yes.
I used to think much less of Harry Truman when I was younger. I mean, I judged him based on his decision to drop the atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and I didn't agree with that decision when I was younger, and I still struggle with that decision.
Let's talk about that for a second, because there's a great scene in Oppenheimer where he goes to talk to President Truman about the bomb, and Truman kind of brushes him off and says, "Don't bring that pansy back in here again." But you have to understand that of Truman's cabinet, it was probably pretty split about yes and 50% yes, 50% no. Ultimately, Truman had to make that decision, and he has to make that decision after 88 days as the vice president, comes in, becomes the president, and he should have been informed about this, but did not even know the Manhattan Project was going on. Didn't even know we had the atomic bomb. And now he has to make the decision to use it. And what's often overlooked is in the weeks leading up to that decision, we ramped up the bombing on Japan kind of conventionally and basically said, surrender or we're going to escalate this to a level that you don't want us to escalate it to. And Japan refused to stop. So they dropped them on relatively low populated areas. They could have dropped them on Kyoto. They could have dropped them on Tokyo, but they didn't. And within a week of doing that, the Japanese surrendered and the war was over. So, there's not a black and white answer to whether it was right or wrong, but I tend to lead in the direction of it being right. And I have a lot of fondness for Harry Truman. David McCullough's book on Truman is fantastic, and I can't recommend it enough.
And then there were other things that not to like about Harry Truman. The Truman Doctrine, which really was all about us beginning to police the world and get up in everybody's business. Some of his racist language that he used.
Imagine that, a man in the early 20th century used racist language. And that's bad. But I think what's more important is what a man does. Truman was very harsh in his rhetoric toward Jews, but he was the first world leader to acknowledge Israel as a nation. So you have to weigh these things. He desegregated the army, integrated the government, so, through executive orders, so that definitely deserves mention. So it's complicated, and words matter, and what a president says matters, but what they do matters more.
But then I learned more about Harry Truman, and the more I learned about him, the more I realized he was just a great common sense leader who really considered all sides to issues, and he just tried to do what was best for the majority. He didn't always get it right, but he certainly did whatever he could to make sure that every voice was heard. Plus, he played piano, and he's from the Kansas City area, so there's that.
He's from Independence, Missouri, I believe. Here's the thing about Truman. He is a man who always worked hard. He didn't always succeed, not a successful businessman in pretty much any venture. And that includes farming, running a clothing store. But when he gets to the Senate, and he spends about 10 years there, and he runs a Senate committee, and it was pretty renowned at the time because Truman was just a no-nonsense public servant. In one of his earliest meetings, they were discussing some sort of railroad legislation. So he goes to the Library of Congress, and he gets pretty much every resource he can find about railroads, and he reads all of it. So when he goes to cast his vote, he knows he's making an educated decision. We just don't have public servants like that anymore. He was a man who, for all the political money behind him, he never let that corrupt him. The Pendergast family was very prominent in getting him elected, but when they tried to get a contract when he was the district judge in his county in Missouri, and he kind of did the precursor to the Eisenhower Highway Project, where he's getting all the roads in the county paved. He said, if you guys give me a fair price and a good job, then I'll give you the job. But he didn't give the contract out just because they were friends. So he's a man of unimpeachable integrity, and I have all the respect for Harry Truman. And Theodore Roosevelt also deserves to be in the top 10.
6. Theodore Roosevelt. Growing up, Theodore Roosevelt was my favorite president. I mean, he was this larger-than-life figure that just seemed to be able to do anything, that was somebody who fought for the common man, and, I kind of lived him up more than he actually was. I still respect Theodore Roosevelt tremendously. He went down the list just because of his foreign policy. The more I learned about his perception of the world, a bit too American-centered. He could have learned a lot more about other cultures, I think. But his boldness was undeniable. I mean, he was an active president. Before he was president, he even signed up to fight a war he was really passionate about. He wasn't just an advocate for the war, he actually fought in it, okay? He set new precedents for the role of president. He stopped strikes. His push for national parks and his conservation efforts were amazing. He bypassed political parties and institutions, went straight to the people, straight to the media.
The bully pulpit.
You know, he loved the press, and he was the first to have the press in the White House. Theodore Roosevelt was all about justice. He was a tough son of a gun. Number 5.
He really was. If there were a contest of toughest presidents, Roosevelt might very well be at the top. The man got shot during a speech and finished the speech. You know, the famous quote when he died in his sleep after contracting an illness on a jungle safari. The quote was, "Death had to take him sleeping, for if he was awake, there would have been a fight." So Theodore Roosevelt, one tough son of a gun, and yes, a very, very good president. He does get docked a few points for the imperialism, but it wasn't anything that every other country at the time wasn't doing. So we have to kind of take historical relevance into account there. But overall, fantastic president, as is Dwight Eisenhower.
5. Dwight D. Eisenhower. Again, I'm a little biased here. Eisenhower was raised in Kansas, my home state, but another World War II hero, a phenomenal leader that helped the Allies get victory in that war. No one can deny the importance of his leadership for an Allied victory. Operation Overlord, the capture of Germany, that was him, and he later was the supreme commander of NATO, for crying out loud. He's a big reason why the Korean War ended, okay? He had a foresight to see what was going on with that. Let's just end this right now. The interstate highway system and NASA. I'm a fan of both, and that was him.
I always forget he founded NASA, but yeah, awesome.
Appointed Earl Warren as Chief Justice for the Supreme Court.
And the Warren Court being considered one of the more liberal Supreme Courts, probably one of the last times, arguably the Warren Burger Court, kind of the last time that the Supreme Court was swung to the liberal spectrum. It's been pretty conservative for the last 30, 40 years.
Freaking Warren. Related to this, he sent federal troops to Little Rock to enforce school integration after the Brown v. Board of Education decision. Eisenhower was a fairly moderate dude. I mean, he saw the importance of social programs, but also saw the importance of a limited government protecting liberty. So he was a great balance of both.
Much like Ulysses Grant, you know, he's a famous war hero and not super political, to the point where both parties are basically trying to recruit him to be president. And he's one of the few presidents in history up there with, you know, Grant or probably Lincoln or Washington, where it would not have been out of the question for a third term. Now, Eisenhower spent a lot of his 2 terms sick, in and out of the hospital, had heart problems. He was an older gentleman, so he was very ill. So it was probably for the best that, I mean, obviously he was constitutionally limited at that point, but that if he had been able to run, he probably wouldn't have. But perhaps one of the most popular presidents in the last 100 years. And we have to recognize all of the overthrowing of Latin American dictators, or not even dictators, of Latin American leaders, and installing our own American-picked ones, and that, more often than not, did not work out. But in a general sense, Eisenhower's an S-tier president.
4. Thomas Jefferson definitely had some flaws, but I call him the...
Flaws? The man spent the entire Washington administration trying to undercut the Washington administration, more particularly undercutting Hamilton. The man was the originator of so many problems we have now. He was the original states' rights hypocrite, and you can just see that in his presidency, where he goes against a lot of his own principles, overreaches the Constitution in a variety of ways, particularly the Louisiana Purchase. Whether or not that was a good thing, you know, is neither here nor there. Constitutional overreach for a person who constantly warned about a too strong of an executive. You have to acknowledge Jefferson's contributions to the founding of the country, and overall a pretty good president, but as a human being, perhaps one of the worst we've ever had.
father of civil liberties. I mean, he was a genius. I mean, the main author of the Declaration of Independence, the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom, his passionate support for the Bill of Rights, and the fact that he popularized many of the ideas in the Bill of Rights. His views were always evolving. It's not like he had the same ideas his entire life. He's what we call a Renaissance man, right? He was constantly trying to better himself and learn new things. He can claim credit for the Louisiana Purchase, which was a bit controversial, but ultimately I think the right thing to do. He saw the good in common people. He promoted democratic ideals when most of the elite did not. So he saw the good in people. I've always liked TJ for that. Number 3. Calvin Coolidge, probably the least egotistical of all the presidents, did not have an ego, actually probably weakened the power of the presidency. The least political of all the presidents. That's great. I love apolitical presidents. Extremely modest dude, okay? He's kind of gotten a bad rap, though. My favorite quote of him, quote, "Perhaps one of the most important accomplishments of my administration has been minding my own business. While the president doesn't create jobs and isn't responsible for the entire economy, the economy did happen to do very well under his watch. More importantly,
They do have
despite
great
that,
influence.
at the same time, he shrank the national budget, shrank the national debt, while simultaneously somehow figuring out a way to cut taxes. He was a fiscal conservative, but a social progressive, outspoken for women's rights and fighting corruption. Had a humble foreign policy and anti-crony capitalism. He used common sense and spoke honestly. He never sugarcoated anything. My number 2 often surprises a lot of people.
So Coolidge, very underrated. You know, they call him Silent Cal, and there's that famous story that may or may not be true about the dinner party where someone says, "Mr. President, I have a bet with a friend that I can get you to say more than 2 words or more than 3 words," and his response is, "You lose." The last person to kind of make the presidency not a factor in your day-to-day life. And he's cited as Ronald Reagan's kind of political hero, which is interesting because they probably couldn't be more different. Coolidge, you know, serves the end of Harding's term, runs for one of his own, and he could have run again, but he chose to step down because he didn't want to break that 2-term precedent, even though he didn't serve. I don't even know if he served more than half of Harding's term. But of course, he steps down and we get Herbert Hoover, and people then say, well, that's when the economy went to crap. But I don't know that Coolidge would have. I don't see it going any differently with Coolidge being in charge, because that was coming no matter what. But not my top 10, but I could easily see the argument for him being up there.
But it is Grover Cleveland. And this may be a surprise even to people who've watched this channel for a long time. Grover Cleveland started out as a teacher. He was a classic liberal who believed in limited government, which explains the majority of his vetoes. He had more vetoes than any other president other than FDR. He had a humble foreign policy. He was anti-interventionist.
I think Cleveland had something like 400 vetoes just in one of his terms. Maybe that's the total number, but he had so many vetoes.
I think you know what I value here with my political beliefs, but he was a big proponent of free trade. He was anti-crony capitalist probably more than any other president. He fought the government corporate monopoly of the railroads. Before he became president, he made a career out of fighting corruption and fighting the political machines of the day. And Grover was a man of integrity, a strong moral compass. He put aside his own selfish desires, always for the greater good. You know, what more could you ask for a public servant of our country?
And my favorite...
Probably one that doesn't have women locked in insane asylums and ignore their bastard children. Mama, where's my pa? He's at the White House. Not saying Cleveland was a bad president, but he's certainly not number 2. And I love Mr. Beat to death, but that is just laughable.
President of all time
is George Washington, which many of you already knew. George Washington, the first president, set all precedents, set the bar very high for all future presidents. Before he was president, though, I mean, he was a military hero. The French and Indian War, the Revolutionary War. More than anyone, he probably single-handedly is the person most responsible for the United States becoming a country, against great odds, against the most powerful military in the world at the time. George Washington was confident but humble. He never wanted to be president. You know, he was kind of forced into that position. I mean, that's always been inspiring to me, that the fact that he limited his own power, he unwillingly took that position. When everybody wanted him to be king, he said no. The humility of George Washington has always inspired me. I mean, he limited his own power, and the great example of that is limiting himself to 2 terms and set that precedent for future presidents until FDR. He was president of the Constitutional Convention when the Constitution was made. He was against political parties. He warned against them. He warned against foreign entanglements and permanent alliances. The Proclamation of Neutrality, I mean, that's what I'm all about. His leadership ending the Whiskey Rebellion. I mean, he was out there personally leading the troops on a horse, for crying out loud. And George Washington, just an amazing leader, respected by all, unified all Americans. I can't imagine another president having as much impact as George Washington. And that will do it, ladies and...
So obviously a few notable, mostly one big notable missing entry is Lincoln, and he's done a short video about why Lincoln's not in there, and it mostly has to do with, you know, him kind of stepping on civil liberties during the Civil War and his treatment of Native Americans, which it's hard to argue against that. But to not put Lincoln in the top 10 is just absurd, in my opinion. In terms of Washington, let's be clear. He was a horrible general. His entire thing in the war was get flanked and retreat. And if not for the French intervening, it's very likely we would not have won the war. The British basically just gave up because it was costing a lot of money. And that's basically it. Same reason the Confederacy lost the Civil War. They didn't have foreign support. You know, we were fighting on our home turf, but we were greatly outnumbered, and if not for French assistance, we very might would have lost the war. In terms of the government under Washington, Hamilton was incredibly influential in that area. The modern economic system of this country doesn't exist without Alexander Hamilton. Using a funded debt to build credit so we can actually fund things and get projects done. The entire Treasury apparatus as we know it was created by Hamilton, basically from scratch. And another person who, if given the opportunity to be the president, would be in the top 10 conversation, hands down. You know, not a horrible top 10 list. Certainly an interesting one. Let me know down below what you guys think about Mr. Beats' top 10 American presidents. Let me know who are your top 10 American presidents. For the love of Jeebus, please keep it civil. Like, share, subscribe if you enjoyed this content. Until next time, never stop learning.